Well, good day to anybody out there looking at the Suppress Herald podcast. It is Sunday, the 11th of January. Holidays are over, lots going on, and we're going to really dwell on just one subject matter this week, and it's called propaganda. And I've been saying this, kind of my catchphrase here at the Suppress Herald podcast, that politics is local and so is propaganda. And as we look at the local news, call it newspaper, I call it the propaganda sheet at the Suppress Herald and its affiliate newspapers, which are most of the papers across Maine, the entire state. It is a definition of propaganda, and we'll start with that. I'd like to go to Merriam-Webster dictionary. First line: propaganda is the dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumors, half truths, or lies to influence public opinion. Deliberateness and a relatively heavy emphasis on manipulation distinguish propaganda from casual conversation or the free and easy exchange of ideas. That is propaganda, and that's what we have in the mainstream media. And that is supported and repeated by local media across this country, right down to radio, right down to the local Suppress Herald newspapers, run by propagandists. And what I'd like to do is just look at one story this week, a single story that's been in the headlines and has been talked about. And I want to look at 5 days of coverage of a woman who was shot in Minneapolis by an ICE agent and how this newspaper, supposedly, this propaganda organization, covered that whole story. Because this is a definition of propaganda. And you can see it if you go through this. It started on Thursday. This happened Wednesday this week. And on Thursday, the newspaper, or propaganda sheet as I call it, the headline is Claiming Self-Defense, ICE Agent Fatally Shoots Driver in Minneapolis. A 37-year-old woman was killed in the incident, which was caught on bystander video. City officials say it shows reckless behavior by federal authorities. All right. Now they go through a Minneapolis driver on Wednesday during the Trump administration's latest immigration crackdown. The 37-year-old woman was shot in front of a family member during a traffic stop in the snowy residential neighborhood south of downtown Minneapolis. This is incredible to me that that's how it started. Very little information about reality. Just started the spin up to the story. Just a 37-year-old woman shot by a bystander who happened to be her wife, who was part of a movement, an organization that was trying to disrupt ICE. We'll start there with some facts and reality. What we have here is 5 days of denying reality, and that's manipulating media to provide propaganda with an agenda. Then you have on Friday, so that was Thursday was the first story. Friday, Minnesota officials say FBI limiting access to evidence. Governor Tim Walz says the state must play a role in investigating Wednesday's fatal shooting by ICE agents, where protesters were venting outrage. Huh. A day after the unidentified ICE officer shot and killed 37-year-old mother of three, Renee Good, as she tried to drive away on a snowy Minnesota street, tensions remained high. That's what you've got on the reporting. The shooting happened on day two of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And then you get down here, Good's death. And it was her name, Renee Good. At least the fifth tied to an immigration crackdown under Trump has resonated far beyond Minneapolis as anti-immigration enforcement protests took place on or were expected Thursday in New York and blah, blah, blah. That's where we are. Several bystanders captured footage of Good's killing, which happened in a residential neighborhood south of downtown. The videos show an officer approaching an SUV stopped across the middle of the road, demanding the driver open the door and grabbing the handle. The Honda Pilot begins to pull forward, and a different ICE officer standing in front of it, pulls his weapon and immediately fires at least two shots at close range, jumping back as the vehicle moves toward him. That's bullshit. That's not what the videos show at all. He drew his gun when his partner was at the window telling the woman to get out of the car. The woman was committing a felony at the time. Renee Good was in the process of committing a felony, interfering with ICE, blocking the road so they couldn't leave this scene, basically. One of their vehicles got stuck in snow. Other vehicles came to help get the vehicle unstuck, and this woman tried to block them in, impeding ICE. She was warned and told to move her vehicle. She refused. One officer went to the window, reached in to try and get the keys, I would imagine, turn the car off and get her out, told her to get out of the car, was going to arrest her for impeding ICE. Another officer was in front of the vehicle, and what we find out from a subsequent video that was shot by that officer, she backed up and then gunned the engine, spun the tires on the ice, hit the officer. He had drawn his gun because he was worried that this woman was going to do something. They didn't know if she had a gun, but his fellow officer was confronting her, and he was in support of that. She backed up, turned the wheel, and started gun to the engine, basically. The tires spun on the ice, and he was pushed on the ice. If he wasn't on ice, more than likely his foot would have stayed where it was, and she would have knocked him down and drove over him. That's what will come out, but that's not what they're telling you. Right here. The video show an officer approaching an SUV stopped across the middle of the road, demanding the driver open the door and grabbing the handle. There is no indication of whether the woman had interactions with ICE agents earlier. I knew at this point that she had been part of a group, organization of anti-ICE. They're not protesters, they're terrorists that are impeding ICE operations. She and her wife were following him around and harassing them all day. That's not in here, is it? None of the exculpatory facts. Then you have the next day, after federal, and this is a story that just keeps going with propaganda. Minnesota prosecutor calls on the public to share Renee Good's shooting evidence because they don't like what they got. So a grieving wife speaks. The prosecutor's announcement came on the third day of Minneapolis protests over Good's killing, and a day after federal immigration officers shot and wounded two people in Portland, Oregon. Now they're going to introduce that. That's going to be added to this. Two Tren de Aragua gang members, one of which was wanted on gun charges, actually was involved in a shooting previously. And when ICE officers went to apprehend them, they tried to run the ICE officers, tried to escape by running the officers over, and they were both shot. Again, using a vehicle as a serious weapon can bring serious results when you're dealing with the police. But that is not in there. This is a quote. On Wednesday, January 7th, we stopped to support our neighbors. We had whistles, they had guns, Becca Good, the wife said. We stopped to support our neighbors. No, you had been part of an organized group designed to organize against ICE, to expose their operations, to dox them, to expose them, to impede them, and you were doing just that at the time. You were out of the vehicle. Your wife was the driver of the vehicle, blocking the road, and you were out of the car filming it. This was all about antagonizing ICE. Stopped to support our neighbors. My, you know what? Then you have the Suppress Herald podcast, propaganda machine in Maine highlighting ICE protests because they have to make this thing grow. They want to turn this into, there's no question, everybody is united on that side. And you can bet that the Alex Soros backed and other left wing funders have sent their agitators to try and gin this thing up and create another George Floyd moment to have protests and everything else to try and take down Trump and take down the immigration enforcement, open those borders back up, and ruin our country. So you have a story here, local story in the Suppress Herald. Kennebunk protest grows in wake of fatal ICE shooting. Venezuela operation. So it's about Venezuela and ICE. And the they keep repeating the same lies over and over again. And they basically got this protest going over what they've painted as an ICE officer just shooting in the window at a woman who was just driving through the neighborhood and just ran into him, and he just killed her. That's what they're trying to say. And you've got these protests going on. But the problem with that is, once in a while, a little bit of reality sinks in. More than 70 protesters stood in front of the Kennebunk Free Library on Thursday afternoon, holding signs as part of a weekly anti-Trump demonstration that began almost a year ago. Now, what had Trump done almost a year ago that would prompt protests? It's really simple. He won. He was the duly elected, very popular vote and electoral college vote strongly president of the United States of America. And they didn't like it, and they've been protesting ever since. Now we've got something new to drive a little bit of press and get it out there. It's called propaganda, and they're just Suppress Herald more than happy to go out and find a group that's been protesting every week, just anti-Trump, that's all it is, and try to blow it up to be something that it's not. And you've got in the Nation section in Sunday's paper today, anti-ICE protesters assemble across the U.S. after shootings in Minneapolis and Portland, Oregon, both involving people committing federal offenses. It is a crime to interfere with police and law enforcement. in this case, ICE. And in the case of the Portland situation, it was Tren de Agua members who had a warrant out for the arrest for one of them for gun charges. He had shot somebody just recently, I believe. And, the police chief in Portland broke down crying when he had to admit that, yeah, they were actually Tren de Aragua, and yeah, they were gang members and they were illegal immigrants. And oh, yeah, they also, one of them shot somebody. So, he was crying over having to come out and admit it. How pitiful is that beyond being, again, just more propaganda? Here's a good one. On Friday night, a protest outside a Minneapolis hotel that attracted about 1,000 people turned violent as demonstrators threw ice, snow, and rocks at officers, Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said during a news conference. They destroyed the hotel. They broke in, they spray painted anti ice all over the hotel and trashed it. We're not hearing about that now, are we? These people are terrorists and criminals. It's all they are. With a grievance. They just hate Trump. That's all it's ever been. It's just same old thing, and they just keep repeating the same lies, and it goes on, and it just seems to never end. It's in all through the paper that this stuff is happening, and goes on forever. So that's what they do. That's the definition of propaganda. And then on Sunday again, across Maine, protesters join in anti-ICE rallies in response to Minnesota killing. Hundreds gathered in Portland and blah, blah, blah. No ice in Maine. And this is the best part. In this article, written by the Suppress Herald propagandist, supposedly a journalist, Portland, hundreds of people gathered around Maine on Saturday to join in a national tribute to a Minneapolis woman who was killed last week by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and to protest the federal agency's actions. Renee Good was shot and killed as she drove through the scene of an ICE operation in her home city Wednesday. As she drove through the scene, she was the scene. She had her car blocking ICE agents from leaving the scene. And when they got out of their car and told her to get out of her car because they were going to arrest her for impeding ICE agents, she tried to run one of them over and he shot her. But gee, that's not in this article, now is it? They don't tell you any of that. She was just driving through and he just shot her. This is not just propaganda, this is criminal. The people that write this at the Suppress Herald are co-conspirators in a movement to destroy the government and what they're doing. They're impeding law enforcement from enforcing our laws. They are part of this movement. They are members of this anti-government organization trying to seed chaos throughout our society and just open the borders again and let thousands of millions of criminals back in. This is just unbelievable, but actually it's fully believable. But that just says it all. That is an actual. Renee Good was shot and killed as she drove through the scene of an ICE operation in her home city Wednesday. For starters, she lived there, but it wasn't her home city. I've looked at 5 days. 5 days. No one has mentioned that she was a criminal, committing a felony, interfering with ICE, that she was, one mentioned she was parked across the road. No mention of her wife, and no mention of reality. You know what's missing here is reality. We need a reality check in the media, but we're not going to get it with the likes of the Suppress Herald because they are just going to keep this going on and on and on. And that's how they do it. This is the definition, as I say, of propaganda. And until we have reality, we're not going to be able to deal with these issues. We have people writing about how we all have to get along and so forth. How can we just relent, just basically fold and say, okay, we're going to buy your lies. We're going to buy your unreality. We're going to buy in to allowing you to take this incident where this woman was plainly breaking the law, had gotten engaged with law enforcement illegally, committing a felony, and then tried to run an officer over. And they're saying, oh, he could have jumped out of the way. I've heard all the excuses in the world. He didn't know in that split second if she was going to turn the wheel left or right and run him over or try to get away. All he knew was her tires were spinning, which has not come out, but I have seen slow motion videos that show very plainly her tires spinning on ice. Remember, they had just dug out one of their cars that was stuck in the snow and ice, spinning on the ice, and his foot, when she hit him, she did strike the officer. Fortunately for him, his foot slid on the ice, and he was able to then push himself, sliding on the ice, in effect skating on the ice, to push himself out of the way. Were it not for the ice, he likely would have been run over and possibly either seriously injured or killed. They also do not tell you in any of these 5 days of reporting that that very same officer about 6 months ago was dragged 150 plus feet in another ice stop with a vehicle and ended up with 30 some stitches in his arm and torn up and very seriously injured, being dragged by someone who was, again, an ice stop trying to get someone to obey the law and was seriously harmed. And these attacks on ice by vehicles have exploded. Nowhere does it say anything about that. If you're an ICE agent and you know that you've had many, many incidents where people are using their vehicles to run into ICE vehicles, potentially run over ICE officers, you're going to be a little trigger happy. These people have put themselves in that position. And here's my last point as we close out this podcast today. Renee Good was nothing but a pawn by this Alex Soros's behind all of this mayhem. He doesn't care one bit that she died. As a matter of fact, Alex Soros is likely celebrating the death of Renee Good. Because if he can gin up another George Floyd insurrection, mayhem, chaos, destruction, pointed at Trump and the Trump administration, then all the better for Alex Soros because that's his goal, is mayhem and chaos. He doesn't care. She is just a pawn who was put there by his organizations funded by Alex Soros. He's got her blood on her hands, not that ICE officer. He put her in that position foolishly, stupidly, to be in a position where she ended up losing her life because she was in the wrong place doing wrong things and put that officer in a really bad position. And believe me, he has to live with having killed her. And believe me, he is not happy about that. But when you put ICE under the gun and you assault them on a daily basis and you're outside their hotels doxing them outside their hotels, making noise, trying to keep them from sleeping, and now, in this case, assaulting them. You're going to get ultimately a situation like this that was created by the people funding these organizations that are creating mayhem and chaos for no good reason. All ICE is doing is rounding up illegal immigrants that are primarily criminals, dangerous on the streets, taking them off the streets, shipping them back home, in some cases arresting them, putting in jail because they are serious criminals. Thousands and thousands of them off of American streets, making our streets safer. But that's apparently a crime in a lot of people's minds. We are living in a very strange world, and propaganda is playing a major part in tearing our country apart. And it starts with local, where politics is local, and so is the propaganda. With that, we hope you have a really, really good day and good week. And we'll keep reporting on the propaganda machine called the Portland Suppress Herald.